So I want to say thank you for everyone who actually you made it. You made it to come earlier and to be in this room to this morning. And thank you very much. And I want also to thank everyone who came actually from all over the world. Yesterday I've been listening all day about the stories about the flights and cancellations and the delays of the flight, but that was depressing a little bit. But we are very much happy that you're all here tonight, this morning. Sorry, sorry, you have to. So I want to say once again, thank you very much. And those who were there yesterday, we have a good day yesterday. And I hope today also will be another success day, and it will be actually very insightful and very productive day. And I want to say thank you very much. Before I stop here, I want to acknowledge actually the presence of our dignitaries who are in the room today. My friend now, if you allow me to say, Stephanie, and actually Assistant Director General of UNESCO, she's in the room this morning, and we are very happy for that. And also my friend, Madam Alice, she's been very instrumental in preparation of the actually previous activities we had before this conference on a workshop on journalists. Together with my friend Serge Bramit. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. And you're making actually our conference very successful, and we really appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that. Maramutse, it's a real honor to be here with you, and even more so to have the opportunity to be in conversation with Alice Nderitu, a Kenyan peace advocate who also has one of the most challenging jobs within the United Nations system, that is being the UN Special Advisor on the prevention of genocide. And for anyone who's had the chance to spend a few minutes, hours, days with her, anyone who is able to dance, to show these beautiful smiles and laugh while working on some of the hardest subjects is a person that you want to keep in good company. So it's an immense honor to be able to have a conversation with Alice. Alice is, as I mentioned, the United Nations Under-Secretary General and advisor on the prevention of genocide, a mediator of armed conflict. She served as a member of the African Union's network of African women in conflict prevention and mediation, FEMWISE, the Women Waging Peace Network, and Global Alliance of Women Mediators. Ms. Nderitu led the founding of Community Voices for Peace and Pluralism, a network of African women professionals preventing, transforming violent, ethnic, racial, and religious conflicts worldwide. I'd like to welcome Alice to come and join me. Oh, thank you, Professor Johnny. Thank you very much. So Alice and I have been tasked with, over the next 45 minutes, giving a bit of an overview of the current international state, the worldwide state on genocide prevention. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. I'm going to do just a short introduction, and then Alice will give remarks, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience for about 15 minutes. So please keep your kind of thinking caps on what you would like to especially ask Alice about. We sit here with a lot of humility, knowing the urgency of the conversation and of the task of genocide and atrocity prevention more broadly. In many ways, it's more urgent today than it was even 30 years ago, given the challenges and threats that are facing people around the world. And it's with a lot of humility that we also recognize that as we sit here today, there are people around the world, people in Sudan, in Ethiopia, DRC, in Syria, Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, China, who are facing immense anguish and threats right now. And hence, I hope that this conversation is not just one about the theory, but also that it's very practical, and especially through Alice's remarks, outlines a plan of action and also is a source of inspiration going forward. I wanted to just start a little bit by reflecting on the last 20 years. and I'll just start with a little bit of a kind of personal account. 20 years ago, I went to a church that is about 1 hour away from here called Interama. And Interama is one of, tragically, many of the churches across Rwanda that became a massacre site. Over 5,000 people were killed there. Only 1 dozen survived. And when I went, it was truly, I can't even find the words to kind of explain or comprehend what I saw. There were bodies of children, of elderly, women and men, the few belongings that they were able to take with them, toothbrushes, rosaries, lying below the pews. I met a gentleman in there who was a sole survivor of his family and of the massacre. And when I left, he closed the tin door behind him. He closed the door with him on the inside, sitting at a desk with the remains. And as he did that, my heart just broke because I thought, he's closing the door, yet he is closing the door to be with his family. And when he did that, I thought about my own grandfather, who had also been the sole survivor of his family, who had come from a city in Poland that had had 230,000 Jews prior to the Holocaust, and of which only 12,000 survived. And as I walked away from that church and I saw a sign that said never again, I just felt such disdain for that sign because I felt, what does never again actually mean? And to this day, despite the last 20 years of working on this, I still have that feeling when I see those terms because we still have such a long way to go in our pursuit of turning this rhetoric into reality. And I wanted to, just before Alice gives her remarks, just paint a little bit of a picture of where we have come in the last 20 years and perhaps one of the challenges that we face or some of the challenges of the next 20. So very briefly, in thinking about where we have come, there have been great strides made. If we think about just on knowledge, we have a much greater understanding of the risk factors that contribute to the potential for the risk of genocide and other mass atrocities. We have developed systems that allow us to do the early warning and monitor those risks. We have a much better and sophisticated understanding of the types of tools and of the strategies that are needed to try to help mitigate those risks and respond to those risks. On norms, we've also made strides there. We've seen in 2001 a global consensus emerge with every head of state and government agree to something called the responsibility to protect, which in essence means that states have a responsibility to protect populations with genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and that when states are manifestly failing to protect, the international community has an obligation to protect. We've seen steps taken towards institutionalization. There's over 60 countries that have committed to create R2P focal points that are supposed to institutionalize atrocity prevention at the national level. We've seen action plans. We've seen countries like the United States say that the prevention of genocide and other mass atrocities is a core national security priority, dedicate financial resources towards that, create task force, interagency processes to try to do a better job at responding to those early warning signs. And we've seen networks emerge, networks of prosecutors, of like-minded governments, of regional entities, of civil society, and of academics, all committed towards moving forward our understanding of genocide prevention and protection, and also action. So there are significant strides, and I know that Serge and others will talk about the incredible innovation and advances that have been made in the justice sector, so I won't go into that. But when it comes to that critical question of action, in all honesty, I think we can also say with a lot of humility that it's a really mixed bag. Because we are better prepared to respond does not mean that governments and international institutions are more inclined to respond. And 20 years later, I would argue that after the adoption of the World Summit Outcome Document, which articulated R2P, after the Commission of Genocide in Rwanda and Srebrenica, we are still struggling with that core focus on how do you mobilize the political will to act. And in many ways, I feel that this conversation is just so critical, and it's really an honor to be able to be here also at the birth of the Isoko Institute, because I think it speaks so much to what the next 20 years needs to be if we want to be honest about giving purpose to that notion of never again. The first 20 years, atrocity prevention and genocide prevention was very statist and institutionalist. It was about what governments have to do and what can be done through formal mechanisms through the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, I would argue that the gaps are so significant. We have promised now so much to communities around the world, and we have too often shown that we are unable, unwilling, or act simply too late to protect them. Therefore, these communities are left often on their own to find solutions on how to prevent and protect themselves, their loved ones, come up with strategies for early warning, humanitarian assistance, finding ways to ensure that their communities can survive. So I would argue that the next 20 years really needs to be about how do we do exactly what this conference is saying, listen and learn and lead more, but have the leading be done by the communities themselves. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because many of you are peace builders, but as many of you also know, the gap and the distance between the perceptions of governments and how they tend to operate and how they engage on these issues of the broad UN system often makes it very difficult to find the places for intersection. Why is this so critical? Because the challenges that we face ahead are enormous. When we think about what are some of the challenges that we're facing and why this pivot is so essential and why we have to do it at such a rapid pace, we see right now emerging new threats. We had, after the Cold War, a long period by which genocide and civil wars, they were reducing. Loss of lives affiliated with them were going down. That has changed. We've backtracked now. We see increasing rising nationalism, populist nationalism, which may be a breeding ground for the potential for the commission of mass atrocity crimes, but it also, unfortunately, leads to states being less inclined to engage with multilateral institutions, to engage abroad. We're seeing a turning inwards by key actors that have been involved in efforts to prevent genocide and conflict in development, countries like the United States, countries like EU member states, and others. We see emerging new threats come from climate change, where increasing communities are going to face vulnerabilities. And we see kind of major power competition render the Security Council yet again unable to respond to the threats that people are facing around the world. And with all of these dynamics in play, again, it comes back to where then is the need right now to really better understand what atrocity prevention for the next 20 years should look like. And I think that really brings it back to how can we support local communities more? How can we ensure that it's their voices that are being heard? How do we take an intersectional approach to that, realizing that even within vulnerable communities, there are specific communities that face additional needs, be it based on gender or sexual orientation? How do we also think about the other actors that need to be at the table? So many of you work with faith leaders, work with youth, work with civil society. We also need to think about how we work with the private sector and how, as we're moving away from this status approach, we understand that in places like Burma, getting Starlink and internet access will allow for Rohingya communities and others to be able to warn about threats that they're facing, will allow them to be able to share with the world what's happening, will allow them to be able to coordinate with each other. And we've seen so many examples, inspiring examples, and I think this is where kind of Alice's work also comes in, where we know that local actors are the ones who are at the forefront of doing genocide prevention every single day and need to be much more centered. It can't be just lip service that we say this, it has to be the reality. Syrian organizations that have been created under the most difficult of circumstances to do early warning, create early warning apps, to create humanitarian organizations that are literally physically rescuing people from under rubble, but also providing medicine, food, education. Iraqi civil society organizations that now that the Iraqi government is pulling out support for a United Nations investigative mechanism, Iraqi organizations that, in accordance with international standards, are documenting the crimes perpetrated 10 years ago by ISIS against the Yazidi and Christian and other communities. They're at the forefront of advancing justice. So how can we make sure that the next 20 years is going to be, the next 30 years, when we think about 30 years since the Rwandan genocide, is one that is really led by a people-centered approach, by a survivor and victim-centered approach. And I'm very, very honored to be able to be here at the launch of the Isoko Institute's initiative, because that is really at the core of the ethos of that. I wanted to just, in conclusion, as turning over to Alice, just say that one of the reasons I started with the story about Interama was that I was reading Freddie's book yesterday, and on page 47, I saw a picture of the man that I met 20 years ago. And I will say that, as with many people in the room, there are a lot of people I have met. There are a lot of things that I've seen that I think many of us wish we didn't see. His image has never left my mind. And what he represented and the collective international failure has never left my mind. But to see him in that book, it reframed for me into an inspirational message. And so it's with deep gratitude that I just want to acknowledge the incredible work that Freddie and everyone at Aegis Trust is doing, and the work that you're trying to do to instill a sense of empathy and compassion that we have for all of humanity, and in a recognition that unfortunately in a world where we seem to struggle to be able to bring attention to more than one or two crises at a time, where entire regions of the world receive inadequate attention, where as we sit here 20 years after the genocide in Darfur, people are yet again imperiled, but there's so little attention. I appreciate the work that you're doing to try to make sure that, again, we are all working together to have a future that embraces a more collective understanding of peace and of compassion and love for each other. With that, it's my profound honor to turn over the microphone to Alice, who's going to provide remarks.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for your introductory remarks. Again, I will dispense with all protocols today because we already had all the protocols established yesterday. So I would like to thank you for this opportunity to present on my mandate and to share critical insights on our collective responsibility to prevent globally genocide and related crimes, by which I mean I refer to war crimes and crimes against humanity. So yesterday I spoke quite a bit about how the office was created, the 1948 convention, the creation by the former Secretary General Kofi Annan of the office. So I won't go into that. But just to say that last year we marked the 75th anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And we have the convention that informs, that's our legal framework. And this convention has the definition of genocide that describes genocides as the intent to destroy in whole or in part ethnic or racial, religious, or national groups as such. So everything I say is focused on those 4 groups. We call them the protected groups: ethnical, racial, religious, national. So all the analysis we do is focused on those 4 groups. And I do know that part of the reason why it took the genocide against the Tutsi for a conviction on genocide to happen was that there was a lot of academic discussion in the years between 1948 and the past conviction for the Akayesu case. And part of this very intense academic discussion on whether those 4 groups were sufficient. A lot of discussion around whether cultural groups should not be included, a lot of discussion about whether political groups should be included. And so what some member states did upon ratification of the convention, like Ethiopia, for example, they expanded the protected groups as they domesticated the convention. So for example, Ethiopia, in its domestication legislation, has, in addition to ethnic, racial, religious, and national, they have political as well. So different countries approach in different ways, depending on what they feel is important for them. So last year, when we marked this convention, we dedicated the day to Raphael Lemkin and his efforts. We tried to educate the world on his efforts. We were a bit taken aback because so few people knew about him. And we gave the theme of the day as we took words that came out of a 1,000 piece article that Lemkin penned for the New York Times when the Genocide Convention was adopted. And he said that he hoped that this convention would become a living force in world society, a living force in world society. And so we looked at how has it been a living force. We brought together academics, scholars. We tried to look for the people with the deepest knowledge on the issue of genocide, and we asked each of them to write a 1,000-page essay. Some of them are in this room. A 1,000-page essay, similar to what Raphael Lemkin wrote, speaking about what they feel has been achieved by this convention, what more it could achieve. So, and of course this year, we were here on the 7th of April, commemorating the 30th anniversary of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, where we learned yesterday, we had yesterday about the 1 million lives lost, and even the imagination of how that translates into every minute, how many were being killed, it teaches us so much. And then next year, we are all going to Srebrenica, hopefully, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where we will be commemorating the 30th anniversary of the genocide committed in Srebrenica. So, of course, these milestones serve as stark reminders of our collective responsibility to prevent genocide. We do know that genocides destroy societies. And yesterday, when we were listening to the session, the Reconciliation Village, when they were presenting, I was sitting there, and of course, because I've been serving in this position for some time, but I've also worked in this field for many, many years, I would assume that I've heard these stories enough times, and that I would be immune to being moved by these stories, but it was as if I was hearing them for the first time. And so we do know that risk factors for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity across the world are quite high right now, and I will speak to that. But first, to explain that I have a global mandate, and that, so I work in all countries and regions in the world without any exception. And we always say that no country or region is immune from the risk of genocide and related crimes. And so part of this involves building the capacities of relevant stakeholders to prevent genocide and raise awareness regarding its dangers. Because when people have the skills, means, and political will to prevent, this is when prevention is most effective. So this speaks directly to my mandate, and my mandate is on early warning. What the Secretary General Kofi Annan then told the Security Council was that he needed somebody who would provide early warning, who would say, we see this coming. So we produce lots of analysis. We grade them in terms of which country is at which spectrum, so we know where the risks are, and then we identify mitigating factors that could be put in place, including through preventive diplomacy, including through quite a number of things that we do, but I'll speak about that just now. So the core document of the office is this document. It's called the Framework of Analysis for the Prevention of Atrocity Crimes, Framework of Analysis for Atrocity Crimes. And this document contains a number of risk factors. And so we have risk factors for genocide, for war crimes, for crimes against humanity. And so like if the common risk factors would be situations of armed conflict or other forms of instability, record of serious violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, weakness of state structures, motives or incentives, capacity to commit atrocity crimes, absence of mitigating factors, enabling circumstances of preparatory action, triggering factors. And then we go into the specific risk factors that speak to intergroup tensions or patterns of discrimination against protected groups, signs of an intent to destroy in whole or in part a protected group, signs of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population, signs of a plan or policy to attack in the civilian population, serious threats to those protected under international humanitarian law, serious threats to humanitarian or peacekeeping operations. So we have this particular document. It draws these risk factors from genocides that have already happened. So we carefully studied the Holocaust and what were the risk factors. What did Germany look like before the Holocaust? What did Rwanda look like in 1993, 1992? Yesterday we heard about early preparations for genocide. What did Srebrenica look like in 1994 before the genocide in 1995? And that is what informs these risk factors. So, because you know, for the crime of genocide, if you have the intention to destroy in whole or in part a whole group, then the methods are so similar that sometimes it's just amazing how similar they are. If you see the perpetrators of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I'm so glad that Serge is here and he'll speak about that. If you see the perpetrators of Rwanda, you'll also see that the methods were really the same. So we also have the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, and I spoke about that yesterday, and it's the policy of this, of the UN on all matters of hate speech, for which my office is the global focal point. And we recognize hate speech as a precursor, indicator, and trigger of genocide and related crimes. And so I would like to now speak to the fact of the Genocide Convention also informing this particular document, so that it's never far from the work that we do. So right now, as we speak, there are so many risk factors, as I said, for genocide and related crimes around the world. And we are now seeing things in real time because the genocide against the Tutsi, the genocide in Srebrenica, all these genocides that have happened, many of them were not in our faces. Sometimes we saw them in newspapers, but it's not the same as switching on the TV every day and seeing on the news issues that are happening that would clearly be speaking to risk factors for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So I'll draw your attention to some of the pressing concerns from the perspective of my mandate. So in Europe, in the Western Balkans, of course, we remain deeply concerned about tensions along identity lines, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we see a troubling resurgence of rhetoric that fueled the conflicts of the 1990s. The situations that I'm speaking about right now, we've been issuing statements about them, so they are out there in the public. So we've seen, I know that there is genocide denial here in this region, and it's very intense, especially in the DRC. But the genocide denial of the Srebrenica genocide in the Balkans, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially by Republika Srpska, is so intense. It's not just genocide denial, it's genocide denial and glorification of war criminals, where you find war criminals who have been convicted for genocide, billboards, murals drawn on them, awards given in their names. School, we had an incident, one particular one of a school, dormitory named after one of the perpetrators. And of course, there is the larger whole idea of the education system and the mono-ethnic schools, and also the two schools under one roof where the children will walk through the gates together and then separate. And then each child is taught by somebody from their ethnic community. So that means that their worldview then is informed by just the ethnic community. And then we have other situations, for example, the situation of the Rohingya population in Myanmar. It remains extremely, very extreme. We are actually issuing a statement about that today. And as we speak right now, the Rohingya who remained in Myanmar are now actually being victimized by both sides. So they are drawn into this war that they do not have like any stakes in at all. And so they have to fight for either side to even survive. And meanwhile, they remain stateless and they remain completely victimized. And I've been to visit the Rohingya quite a bit, including in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And this reports of what they continue to face, the discrimination, dehumanization, and denial of basic rights, including citizenship, continues. I've spoken so consistently on Sudan. Since I joined this office, I have never issued as many statements as I have issued around Sudan. Usually, if I issue just one statement on one situation, then everybody's like, okay, what's going on there? And you see the reaction. But for Sudan, I can tell you it's just been incredible. 10 statements, 10. Have never, none, even my predecessors have never issued 10 statements for one situation. And I briefed the Security Council recently, and I made a very strong appeal to them, and I said, I asked, what are you waiting for? Like, everything is out there. And you know, we have a situation in Darfur especially, and I was recently in Chad to meet the communities that have escaped from Darfur, which is right next to Darfur. And it's very, very clear that they are targeted on the basis of ethnicity, that they are targeted on the basis of color, and that those who are in the camp are mainly Masalit and Zagawa as well. And so Darfur, Sudan as a whole, because I've been issuing statements for a long time, I just didn't start issuing them. I've issued statements on Kordofan, on the Blue Nile, on all these spaces. And we do know that the lack of accountability for past crimes has provided fertile ground for current violence, and that we urgently need to investigate ongoing violations and abuses and pursue accountability to protect those at risk and provide justice for victims and survivors. And in this particular instance, the ICC only has jurisdiction for Darfur. Then, of course, the Democratic Republic of Congo remains of great concern. I was there too. And we've done huge, extensive research in terms of what is going on in the Congo. I'm concerned about this, our sister from Nigeria, Chinamada, she speaks about the danger of the single narrative. And so this single narrative that speaks about the M23, which is one of the armed groups in the DRC, but we have more than 130 armed groups in that particular space in the Kivus. And these armed groups, they've really, like Codeco, for example, kills people like all the time. And if we don't pay attention to the other armed groups, if we don't listen to, for example, what Dr. Mukwege was speaking about when he got, if you read the citation of Dr. Mukwege when he received his Nobel Peace Prize, when he was talking about that from the way the women are mutilated in the kibbutz especially, he can tell which armed group attacked which woman. Like they have specific ways in which they mutilate women. So there are a lot of armed groups getting away with so much as we pursue this single story. We have I've paid, of course, specific attention to specific communities. I've spoken quite a bit about the Banyamulenge, about the Hema. I've spoken about all the communities that are fighting each other. But remember that the focus of the office is on the intent. It's their intent to destroy in whole or in part this particular group. And so our focus is on ethnic conflict, but also on ethnic conflict that's informed by intent. So attacks along ethnic lines persist. We have widespread attacks against the civilian populations, and I can't name like all the ethnic groups. I'll not go into great detail in terms of all the ethnic groups that are at war. But I have also consistently issued statements on the DRC. We issued a statement on the DRC, speaking about, at that time we were talking about Kenya-Rwanda speaking people. But then we stopped speaking about Kenya-Rwanda speaking people in the DRC because the FDLR who escaped from here, we do know that there was a mass move of the people, the perpetrators from this country, and they moved to the DRC and they created the FDLR. And that then they began to attack Rwanda, and that they continue to be there. We have more than 500 people indicted, and Sarge will speak about it when who is Under Secretary General and Chief Prosecutor. He has a session today, he'll speak about it. They are living free in the DRC, they haven't been held to account. And so for us to expect that nothing will happen when you have people who are indicted and who are out there, and they are not the only ones who are indicted. Sarge will tell you about other people in the world who are hosting genocidaires who've been indicted and not held to account. And of course, we feel especially glad, and I remember issuing a statement when this lady who was secretary to the commander of Auschwitz, when she was arrested and brought to trial and she was 100 years old. And so that's the message that we keep sending out to perpetrators, that the wheels of justice may be slow, but one day we will get there. Then in the Central Sahel region, we have intercommunal violence and violent extremism that continues to threaten civilian populations with targeted attacks along ethnic and community lines, ill treatment and destruction of property. And we've also witnessed serious violations along identity lines in Afghanistan. We saw the attacks against especially the Shia Hazaras, places of worship and schools. And I remember issuing a statement about that and saying that ISIS is not gone, that Daesh is still attacking. We saw the recent attack in Oman by Daesh, and that Daesh is still existing, and that they've been focusing on places and people like the Hazara, who remain one of the people who've so persecuted. And then, of course, we've been following South Sudan, a lot of ethnic conflict going on there. So much reprisals happening there. And then, of course, we've been following Gaza in regard to the civilian deaths happening in Gaza, that when children die, or when people who, especially children who are completely defenseless, are being killed, and of course it's being brought to us. And I must emphasize that I was interviewed by the BBC when I spoke to the Security Council about Sudan, and I challenged them. I told them, on your website, I can see a tab for Gaza, and on your website, I can see a tab for Ukraine. Where is the tab for Sudan? Where is it? How can I issue 10 statements? How can I speak to the Security Council? And you ask me to come and speak to you about the situation of Sudan, but you don't have a tab for Sudan. Why is Sudan not important? Why is it not being put out there? And of course, that is not to say that what's happening in Gaza and Ukraine is not important. It is important, but we do note that Sudan is not getting the priority that it should. And then in the Americas, and I'm just highlighting, we have so many situations. So in the Americas, I'm very concerned, I remain very concerned with the situation of indigenous peoples. And we went to Brazil on the invitation of the president of Brazil, President Lula. And we spent quite a bit of time, especially looking at the situation of the Yanomami people in Roraima State and the Guarani Kiowa in Mato Grosso do Sul. And just looking at the killings of their leaders, human rights and environmental defenders, rapes of women and girls, detentions, which are also well documented, and the impact on the living conditions, including their health, especially mental health. And I was so touched. Like, one of the things that I carried from the indigenous communities that I met there was that they have the highest rates of suicide of young people, especially young men, who feel that they have no option, that their lives have no option. They don't even have the skills to cope with what is happening to them right now, this new world that is arriving at their doorsteps. And then we have an increasing number of migrants and asylum seekers who are dying in transit. And we had one of our teams going around the Mediterranean Sea and documenting the growing racism against those before they go, and even those who survive the journey, and of course migrants all over the world. And we've also, of course, paid so much attention to technology in the way it's connected us in unprecedented ways, but also been weaponized for online surveillance and harassment, and the exponential spread of online hate speech, often instrumentalized for political gain that foments division, violence, and in the most serious cases, genocide and related crimes. So as the person coordinating the hate speech in the UN, so we continue to support UN country field presences globally. So we have quite a number of them who have done plans of action on countering hate speech. The most recent being Rwanda, this just last week. So my colleagues, Simona, Nabil, and Dalila have led the process with the UN country team here. And so I can't go, these situations are so many, yeah. So now I would need to just highlight areas where progress has been made and where continued efforts are crucial. So in terms of prevention, we always ask member states to ratify the convention. They need to ratify or accede to the convention, demonstrate its continued significance in today's world. We have 153 who have signed, the latest of which being Zambia, and I was in Zambia to flag off, to launch a Prevention of Genocide Committee. Very impressive. And then the second point is on accountability and justice, and I will not go much into that because you have a presentation from the chief prosecutor himself, who is here, Serge Bramat, about the International Criminal Tribunals for Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia, and the International Residual Mechanism. And then, of course, we have education and memorialization. And I would say, in terms of education and memorialization, I would put at the very front the work of the extraordinary chambers of the courts of Cambodia. But I would also put at the very front Cambodia itself, the work of DCCAM. And Farina is here. Please, Farina, stand up so that people know, yeah, that's Farina. So Farina, working with Farina, we've done huge amounts of work around education. The DCCAM had documented everything. They have very impressive archives of what happened in Cambodia. And then in terms of what needs to be done, I would say the first thing is that genocides happen in places where we do not have the political will or the capacity to stop them. And so political will, I'm not just talking about the state, although the first responsibility of preventing genocide belongs to the state. But we do know that in Rwanda, in Srebrenica, that in Germany, the state was involved. But we have also responsibility as other parts of the world, as the UN community, for example, to prevent. And then we do know that I'm so informed by the fact of when post-election violence was happening in Kenya in 2007, part of what we kept hearing from people was that we knew we were going to be attacked, but we did not know who to tell. And sadly, that remains the situation of most people around the world. Each time in New York, I hear a siren, and it's like every 2 or so minutes. I always think to myself, that is the power of response. So many people in the places that we are working in have never had a siren. Mm-hmm. They have no 911, they have nobody to call. They do know exactly, like in Darfur, they call, they tell us we will be attacked at 5 o'clock by so-and-so, and it happens exactly as they say. So that, of course, remains a big issue. And then we have the issue of this market for weapons. So we have the willing buyer, willing seller market. And then right now, the permanent representative of Costa Rica in the UN, she's been running this campaign against munitions. Because as we speak right now, what's happening is that guns are given for free in many of these places in the Sahel. You can get a gun for free from the gun manufacturers. All you need to do is buy the munitions. In the same way that you can get a printer for free and then you buy the cartridge. Because you can't be sitting with the printer and just looking at it wondering whether it works. You will go and buy the cartridge. So that is what's happening. She's been running this huge campaign against munitions, and we got a convention against it.
Alice, if I may interrupt just for one moment. I do want to make sure we have a few minutes available for questions. So what I'd like to ask just in preparation as you close is if people who have a question, if you can raise your hand, we're going to take, I think, 2 or 3, and Mira will come around. So just as soon as Alice has finished her powerful remarks, we'll be able to make sure that a few questions are held. Sorry for that, Alice.
No, thank you, Naomi. I think they'll be asking questions on some of the things I'm just about to say, so let me say them.
Great.
And I also know that we have developed quite a lot of information, huge amounts of early warning that exist around the world, including with your organization, Naomi. You put together huge amounts of early warning. And so what to do with this early warning is usually quite a question for quite a number of people. We need to also work around strengthening these national structures that are aimed at peace building, preventing genocide and related crimes. Education is everything. I think education is really the key in terms of ensuring that the lessons from the past are never forgotten. We need to protect all these vulnerable populations at risk. We need to promote dialogue. We need to speak more about promoting mental health. And at the end of the day, I must say that our failure to respond promptly to warning signs does allow genocides to happen, because we do have the warning signs. We do know, based on the 4 categories that I spoke about, we do know. When we see anti-Semitism, when we see when we see this language against Muslims, we see language against women, we see language against Black people, we do know that this is actually preparation. So I would like to stop here and then engage you as we continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was a really remarkable tour de force on not just the countries of concerns, but also the core principles that are involved in atrocity prevention. And I really commend you also for just highlighting that in the world we live in today, genocide is perpetrated not just by state actors, but also non-state actors, as you referenced in your conversations about Iraq, and the remarkable work around hate speech. You know, the fact that we're in a country where RTLM and hate speech was so virulent, and today it's turbocharging, especially social media, a lot of the risks, and you've been at the forefront of trying to find ways of tackling that. I'm going to turn it to Mira just in terms of the questions.
Good morning, Madam Secretary, and good morning to everyone. I want to thank the AG's Trust and its partners for an opportunity like this one. And Madam Secretary, I have a question in relation to Cameroon. I am a Cameroonian. I am a barrister cum judge, an advocate with the Rwandan bar. I have followed you keenly and of all the conflicts and crises around the world that you've mentioned. I've heard nothing about Cameroon. Cameroon has been in a conflict for over 8 years now, for about 8 years, and it's an armed conflict. Last year, I was in Cameroon, and for over 5 years, I've not been able to meet my family. I was not able to go to my village to meet my loved ones because of the conflict. I witnessed 10 people summarily picked up and executed at a road square by gunshots in front of me, and it sent a chill in my spine. The conflict in Cameroon is something that one can liken to the preparation of what happened in Rwanda. Rwanda did not just happen in '94. There were signs evident to what was building up to culminate to what we had in 1994. And in Cameroon, the immediate cause of what happened in Rwanda was the demise of the president. And I can liken that to Cameroon because the president of Cameroon is over 92 years now. And this conflict has persisted for 8 years. I imagine if he quits the scene today, Cameroon can plunge into a chaos that is likely to be described as what happened here.
Yeah.
So my question is, what has the UN and most particularly the department in which you work has done to address the situation in Cameroon? And secondly, I would like to know, as young people, what role can the young people play in diffusing the tension? Because there has been a lot of hate speech build up. People don't see themselves as, there is this group that is called, there's a part of it called Ambazonia, the English territory, and there's a French territory, and they don't see themselves as Cameroonian. And I have watched them kill even ordinary civilians. I've watched the military move into even my village, burn down villages, kill people. And I am wondering what number of people it would take to kill before the UN does something, before the international community does something. It has been tagged as one of the most underreported conflicts in the world.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. And I'm very sorry for the experiences of your family directly. Let's take one more question, and then we'll turn it to Alice.
Hi, can I ask my question? Yeah, thank you. My name is David. I work here with the GIZ in the region on conflict transformation. Ms. Naomi, you said before that it's the obligation of the state to prevent genocide against its people. And if the state fails or the state is involved itself, it's up to the international community. And Ms. Alice gave some current examples. And so my question is, if the state fails, but the international community refuses to intervene, like we see right now, for example, in Sudan, I mean, what can the UN do? What can the Security Council do? What can the office of Ms. Alice do? They can obviously not force the international community to intervene. Of course, they can support local organizations, but I think sometimes it's not enough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very important question. Turning it over to Alice. Okay. May we take, Alice would like to take one more question, please. I think we only have enough time for one more.
Can I say that?
My name is Anne Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa and I live in the United States of America. And I want to applaud the office for doing a lot of work and beginning to engage with the corporate world. I know work has been done with social media companies. But if we look at, my question is the extent to which the UN and the office can make a greater appeal to bring the corporate world and the power of the purse to the table. I really note, you know, it is a destruction of societies. It's also a destruction of economies. And making the business case between hate speech, war, and economic demise really is the business case in terms of appealing to corporate chiefs who could or would have a seat at the table. So to what extent could the UN do more to bring these corporate chiefs, particularly modern capitalists, who care about a triple bottom line and focus on profit, environment, and social impact, and not just profit? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know there are a number of additional questions, and what I'd like to ask that hopefully I know Alice would be open to answering questions after the panel as well, but I want to make sure that Serge and others have a chance for their panel. So why don't we go with those three questions? Thank you, Alice. And I'm very sorry for those who were hoping to ask a question.
So thank you very much, and sorry for this Alidia who's been raising her hand from the very beginning, and I'll engage you straight after we get out of here. And so as to the question of Cameroon, I said that I could not name every country that we are looking at. But I must say that we are very, very careful in terms of, or every region that we are looking at, we're usually very, very careful in terms of addressing the issue of genocide. I don't think there's a day I walk out of the UN and there isn't somebody with a placard outside the UN standing and saying that there's genocide in my country from very many different contexts. But as you hear from Saj when he presents, genocide is the crime of crimes. There is a reason why so few contexts have been determined legally as genocide, and because intent has to be there. So unless we are very, very sure that we are looking at a situation where there is a situation where there is intent, then we don't quite pay attention to that particular space. So I would say, so for Cameroon, our colleagues in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have done a lot of work. I remember getting a letter from the people of Ambazonia, and I have been there. I have been to Ambazonia. And I remember also facilitating the presentations of the people of Ambazonia to the Security Council. So there's quite a bit that's happening behind the scenes in terms of trying to get the things done. And I think the response to the second question in terms of the international community refusing to intervene, we have, in terms of intervention, we also have regional organizations. So we also focus a lot on, for example, on Sudan, what the African Union is doing, what all these regional organizations are doing, IGAD, or the regional organizations that cover that particular space of Sudan, for example. Sudan is just an example. This could be speaking to another place, like, for example, for Ukraine, working with the EU on what needs to be done in Ukraine. And that, the reason being because with the office that I lead is called the Special Advisor for Prevention of Genocide as Under Secretary General. And so in my office, we have the prevention of genocide. We also have responsibility to protect. And there is an ASG who is in charge of responsibility to protect. However, in terms of intervention, intervention can only be approved by the Security Council. And the Security Council is quite divided in terms of intervention, in terms of whether to intervene or not. So there are other options that they put in place, like sanctions and and embargoes and preventive diplomacy. But in terms of actual intervening, they hold back from intervening, mainly due to the fact of how state sovereignty is held so closely by states, but also because of the past experience of Libya. Libya, I think, is the one that shaped the thinking in terms of whether to intervene or not. And so, does this mean then that there is no hope? Well, no, there is hope, because we have, for a long time, mainly because we always saw genocides as needing a state, the state to perpetrate, like what happened here in Rwanda, what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina, what happened in Germany, that the assumption was always that international intervention would be the only thing that could work. But we have seen, for example, a court in Frankfurt about 2 years ago, determining that one person whose name is Taha, who bought 1 Yazidi woman, and then he proceeded to kill her child by stabbing the child to death, that he was guilty of genocide, one person. And then looking at the approach, the shifting of the thinking that a genocide can actually be perpetrated even without a state. You don't need a state to perpetrate a genocide. So there is thinking that moves in another direction. And so, of course, that thinking has to be accompanied by action. That if you do not need a state to perpetrate a genocide, that ordinary people like an ethnic militia can perpetrate a genocide without a state, then therefore, in terms of reaction, we do need to speak to what then can ordinary people do in terms of reaction. And we have we created in Kenya after the post-election violence of 2007 and 8, what we call the Uyano Platform for Peace, linking early warning to early response at the community level. So that if you know that you are going to be attacked, that then we map the community and we think of who is it in the community that you can tell. What can the teachers do? What can the doctors do? What can the elders do? And if they are all complicit in it, who then can come to your assistance? So on the last question on social media companies and what we need to do in terms of that space, or the private sector, we have the UN Global Compact in which all these companies are registered in, and we work with those companies in terms of ensuring that in the spaces they are working. And you know, I'm always saying that I've been probably to some of the most remote places in this world. I've been, and I'm talking about remote, not in terms of Iceland, but in places where there are risk factors for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And I always marvel that you will go to a place where there is nothing, but Coca-Cola is there. And so you ask yourself, how did Coca-Cola get here? And then you think about the agency that Coca-Cola has in terms of reach and outreach and getting into those spaces. So for social media companies, we've done quite a bit. We've a plan of action on countering online hate speech. We've been having Chatham House Rule meetings with their leadership for years now. We briefed together jointly the Security Council in October 2021. We've, our partners here, Stefania, UNESCO, they've done huge amounts of work, especially on Holocaust education and algorithms and ensuring that whatever you are searching for leads you to the direction of what actually happened during the Holocaust, not its denial. So I just wish I had more time with you, but I think we have to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you so much, Alice. Just very briefly, just on Cameroon, it has been a country of priority for our organization. And I think in your country, tragically, one of the challenges is we see the narrative of counterterrorism and military support being the prevailing, those who are providing the money, the weapons. In that instance, again, you see competing interests. You see different conflicts overlapped with each other. So for example, for the US government, they have a vested interest in seeing certain outcomes vis-a-vis what's happening in Gaza and Israel, which relates as well to UAE and Qatar. UAE and Qatar, there's relationships vis-a-vis Sudan. So where are they going to leverage their weight in trying to influence potential perpetrators? That's why a lot of our focus has been on local actors, how to get information out, support local journalists, support people that are trying to do the mapping that Alice was talking about. And I know it's woefully, it's not sufficient given the risks, but it's unfortunately the reality that we're looking at. And then just on the last point, we often talk in the context of social media and private sector actors about the fact that they need to do the same things that governments have done in terms of appointing R2P focal points. They have to move away from a crisis response by which the only times they talk about atrocity prevention is when Facebook is used to help facilitate the commission of genocide in Burma. And instead, they need to create their own senior individuals who are in the C-suite and are tasked with the responsibility of thinking about atrocity prevention and mass atrocity prevention. Until we really see that architecture for prevention that we've been working on in the UN system, in governments replicated in certain spaces like the private sector as well, I don't think we'll be able to actually meet the challenges of the future. Thank you so much, Alice, for just the incredible insights and work that you're doing. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions, and I'm sorry that we've gone over. Thank you.